Hello everybody, and welcome back to another video in this web development course. And in this video, I'm excited to be starting JavaScript. That's going to be our next topic. So up until this point, we've done HTML and we've done CSS, and we've looked at how we can combine the two of those to make good-looking, professional quality websites. But with that, those websites have been responsive and able to adjust to different screen sizes, but there was very little interaction. In fact, even the elements that we put on those websites that needed interaction didn't have a whole lot, right? We had forms and buttons, and we needed to do stuff with that data. And up until this point, we haven't, because we haven't done anything with JavaScript. So JavaScript is a lightweight programming language that's used for all kinds of stuff. In this course, we're using it for web development, obviously, but it's also used for back-end development using Node.js, and they use it in game development and for various different applications, and it's one of the most popular programming languages in the world. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump right in. I'm going to open up, you can see here I have my VS Code as well as Google Chrome. So in a Google Chrome window, or any browser really, if you just right click anywhere, go down to Inspect, it'll bring up this development tools. And then if you go over to the console tab right here, this is going to be our obviously our tab in our web development tools in the console, where we're going to see all of the logs. So anything that we log inside of our JavaScript code is going to show up in here. So for example, if I just come in here and type console.log 1 + 2, and then hit enter on that, you can see it prints out 3, which is the result of our math equation, 1 + 2. And then after that, you can see it prints out undefined. And basically, you don't need to worry about it printing out undefined right now. What that is in the browser console, it's going to evaluate this last expression as a Boolean statement. Boolean meaning it's either going to be true or false. And because console.log 1 + 2 is not true or false, that comes up as undefined. If I were to come down here and say 1 = 2, you can see now it comes back. It comes up as false instead of undefined. Or if I say 1 = 1, now it comes back true. And while we're here in JavaScript, there's actually 2 different equals. So for example, we have our first equal sign, and that's for if I want to make a variable. So let's say I want to store a constant number. So const number 1 is equal to 1. If I just put a single equal sign like we've done here, you can see that if I hit enter on that, I get undefined because this is not a comparison statement anymore, checking if it's true or false. But now if I come down here and type console.log, and then in here I type number 1, which is the name of our variable, now it prints out 1, which was the value that we put in our variable with a single equal sign, which is called your assignment operator in JavaScript. So while we're here, let's go ahead and just really quick explain what a variable is, because that's a concept that you're going to run into all the time in programming. So let's think of a variable like it's a box. And this is essentially a section in memory somewhere. And in this section of memory, I can put whatever data I want to store in there. So it could be a name, it can be text, it can be a number, any type of data I can store inside of my variable. So in our case, we have a number 1 that we set equal to 1. So this is going to be our number 1 variable. This is the variable name. And then in this section of memory, we're going to have the value 1 stored. So now if I were to come in here and make a different variable, let's say maybe we want a greeting. I could say const greeting is equal to, and then if I put this in quotes, I can type whatever I want here. So hello, how are you? Now, if I were to hit enter on that and then type console.log greeting, Now, if we go ahead and hit enter on that, you can see it doesn't print the word greeting, it prints hello, how are you? If I were to come in here and type console.log, and then instead of writing just greeting, if I put it in quotes and say greeting, now this, because it's in quotes, this is going to treat this like its own piece of data. It's not going to go reference the variable named greeting. So if I hit enter there, it just says greeting. So a variable, think of a variable like this. It's just a spot in memory or a location in memory where we can store data. And then anytime we need to come back to pull this data out, we can reference that data by the name. So in this case, the name is greeting. In this case, the name is number one. So that's what the single equal sign is used for. That's going to be what we call our assignment operator. And then after that single equal sign, you have your double equal sign. And the double equal sign is going to be your equality operator. So if I come down here and say number one double equal 1, you can see I get true. And so I told you before, basically this line down here, we're evaluating this expression. So because number 1 is a reference to a location in memory where we have an actual number 1 stored, well now number 1 is equal to number 1, right? So this double equal sign is checking if this statement is true. Number 1 is equal to 1, and that's true. So if I change this to 2, now I get false because, again, it's checking if this is true or not. If I had if I put something like 1 inside quotes, I still get true because this 1, even though it's a string, the value of it is still equal to the number that we store in 1. So this is the kind of thing that you can do in JavaScript. But if I want to compare the values of two items and I want to go ahead and verify not only is the value the same, but the object type is the same too, well, you can do that. So here, for example, because it's in quotes, this is actually text. But here we set number 1 equal to a 1, which is not in quotes, which is going to make that a number or a numeric value saved in our memory. So if I were to come down here and say number 1 and then do 3 equal signs is equal to 1 in quotes, now I get false. And the difference here is this double equal sign is going to be comparing number 1, the value stored in number 1, to the value of this string here. And because this is a string, it's going to convert that to a numeric value and get 1. But down here, we're not only comparing the value, we're also comparing if the type of the object is the same. So in this case, number 1 is a numeric type. And then 1 here inside the quotes is a string type. So if I were to come out here and take the quotes away and change that back to 1, you can see I get true again. So in JavaScript, that's where you get your single equal sign, your double equal sign, and then your triple equal sign. Now, if we want to actually put this into our code, let's go ahead and do that. And here, I'm going to make a new file. I'll just call this JSDemo1. We'll drag and drop that into here, and now we have an empty folder open. So let's add a new file to that, and we'll call this index.html. So you'll remember if we just hit exclamation mark and use the emmet, we can generate a template. Up here, I'm going to give this a name, so I can say JavaScript intro. And for JavaScript, of course, they're just like CSS. We had the inline, the internal, and then the external. For JavaScript, you can do it internally and externally as well. So if up here above my body in my header, I put a scripts tag, now any code that I put inside of these two script HTML tags, I can then reference down below in my body. So if I were to come in here and let's just say we have a function that we're going to name greeting. And then inside of this function, so this is the basic syntax for a function in JavaScript, which if you're not familiar, a function is basically a block of code that, just like a variable, we can reference this number 1 by the variable name. So a function is similar in that anything I put in between these two brackets here is going to be all the code that belongs to that function. And I can then reference that code and run that code just by referring to the name of the function within my code files here. So to do that in here, if I were to go ahead and make a function, so let's give it one variable, and in the variable, I'll just say const name, and we can set the name equal to your name. Here, I'll just do my name. So const name equals Tim, and then a semicolon at the end of that line. And then after that, we can go ahead and write console.log. And inside of here, we're going to go ahead and write. So I could just come in here, do quotes, and say, hello, Tim, how are you? And if I run that, that's going to work fine. The only problem is we have this Tim here, and we wrote it again down here. So if I want to use my variable inside of this text down here, I actually need to do this just a little bit differently. So I'm going to cut that out and delete those quotation marks. And instead of quotation marks, right, so in JavaScript, you've got 3 different types of quotation marks. You've got your double quotation marks, and then you've got your single quotation marks. And then after that, you have your backtick quotation marks, which this backtick here is going to be, if you look on your keyboard, this is the key just before your number 1 and just above the tab key, directly below the escape key. So if inside of these backticks, I go ahead and paste my code, and now instead of writing Tim, if I write $sign and then open close bracket, now whatever I put inside of these brackets is going to be a JavaScript expression that will then be converted. Whatever the value of that expression is will be converted to a string. So if I type $ and then brackets and then type name and go ahead and save this file, if I were to open this with a live server now, and let's just open that in a new tab over here. So I have this live server open. If I right click on that and go to inspect and go to the console, you see that even though I have this code here to write a log to our console, so you think that would need to show up over here, we don't actually see anything inside of our console. So the reason we don't see anything inside of our console is we have this function, but just like I told you, a function is a reference. It's a name reference for this code. And if we never actually reference this function outside of that, this function won't be called. So just to demonstrate how we can run this code inside JavaScript, I'm going to put a button down here. And then in this button, I'm going to set an on-click. And in this on-click listener, if I just type my function name with open close parentheses after it and paste that in there, now if I were to go ahead and save this file, you can see I get this button. Let's put some text in it so it's a little bigger. Click me. Now if I click on this button, you can see that this JavaScript code that we have inside of our function is actually being run. And if I click on the button again, you can see now I get a 2 next to that, and a 3 next to that, and a 4 next to that. So basically what this means when I have the number next to that in the console, that means that I'm getting this specific log 4 times in a row. So every time I click that, it's going to add a number to that. So that's how you can reference some JavaScript code inside of your file directly if you want to put the entire JavaScript inside of the HTML file. But just like before with CSS, how we had our internal CSS and then our external CSS, we have that same thing in JavaScript. So if I make a new file here, and we'll just call it script.js, and then in this file, I can say console.log, and then inside of quotes, I can say this is my external JavaScript. So now we'll go ahead and put a semicolon at the end of that, because typically in JavaScript you end every line with a semicolon, and that just tells the system that's running the code, or the browser that's running the code, that this is the end of that statement. So here we now have our script with a console.log statement in there, and then our index file. And again, if I save that, you'll see that it doesn't print anything from that script. So just like before in CSS, if I wanted to make a CSS file, you'll remember that we had up here, we would type link and then CSS, and then we could make this style.css, and here's our styles.css. But just like that, if I want to make a script file, we can say script, and then there's an src, and this src, if I just come in here and all we need to type is script.js. Now if I save that, you can see that this script line, this is my external JavaScript, was executed as soon as I ran that code. So typically what you'll do for external JavaScript, if you're linking it into an HTML file, is you will simply put this script tag as the last line inside the body. So you have all of your body code up here, and then the script tag is going to be the last line, and that's going to contain the file for your JavaScript. And once you have that there, you're able to actually reference anything in that file whenever you need to. So with that being said, we covered our internal JavaScript up here, which shows how we can create internal JavaScript functions that we can run inside of our HTML web page. And we also talked about our external JavaScript file and how we can link an external JavaScript file here as well. We talked a little bit about variables. We talked about how that was like a box where we can store data that we can then reference and use later in our program. And we talked a little bit about the assignment operator that we use to set variables. We also talked about our equality operator, which, if you'll remember, we said the equality operator was our double equals, and that compared the value of two pieces of data. And then we talked about our strict equality operator, which is our triple equal sign. And we said the difference between the two of those is this top one is going to compare only the value between two objects, and the bottom one is going to compare the value and the type. So that was the difference between the two of those. Hopefully you learned something here, and try not to get too overwhelmed, especially if you've never done any coding before. This is one of those things that just takes a lot of time and practice, and just keep going and you will understand it. But you definitely are not going to just start JavaScript one day and then on day 2 or 3 be an expert all of a sudden. This is something that takes a long, long time to master. And we're talking like hundreds and thousands of hours to master. So don't get discouraged if you are now one video in and you're like, oh, I don't understand anything. Just give it time, give it practice. Keep reading all the reference material that I'm going to link down in the description in this video, and try all of the practice exercises in that documentation, and you will get it. It just takes time. So stick with it, and we will see you in the next video.